Today, we're doing something huge, ranking all 38 evolutions in Clash Royale as of the October meta. From the weakest underperformers to the absolute meta-defining beasts, we're breaking down every single card and showing you exactly where they stand. Make sure you stick around because some of these rankings might shock you. 38. Goblin Drill. This version simply fails to deliver sufficient utility, making the standard Goblin Drill a much better card choice. Players are much better served using the non-evolved drill and allocating their evolution slots to other, more powerful cards, such as the evolved Skeletons, Tesla, or Snowball. Since Supercell removed the spawn death damage for the evolved drill, its viability has plummeted, making it practically unusable. 37. Goblin Giant. Surprisingly, the evolved Goblin Giant has plummeted from being one of the game's elite evolutions to, in my view, the second worst. It was hit with 3 substantial downgrades during the most recent balancing adjustments. The Goblin Giant saw a 7% reduction in its health pool. Furthermore, the spear goblins riding on its back received a slower hit speed along with a shorter attack range. 3 nerfs in combination were certainly enough to ruin the card, which is evident in the near absence of players using the evolved Goblin Giant following these changes, compounded by the simultaneous nerf to the Chef Tower Troop. The combined effect of those 4 changes has utterly destroyed this evolution. 36. Bomber. The 2 Elixir Standard Bomber often provides significantly better returns. It's a situation similar to the Goblin Drill, where you're far better off deploying the regular bomber because the evolved version's benefit has been severely limited ever since they eliminated its ability to hit the same target twice, which was especially noticeable against towers. You can't get double hits on crown towers anymore. It's primarily restricted to use in heavier deck archetypes. You rarely see it in cycle decks. You might occasionally spot it in a Lava Hound deck, but generally speaking, other evolutions are simply superior. 35. Dark Goblin. The evolved Dark Goblin has also declined significantly, especially after the change to its permanent gas effect, where the smoke cloud used to last indefinitely. It's much more balanced now, and you could actually argue it's on the weaker side, because many logbait decks are now opting for different evolutions instead of the evolved Dark Goblin. In fact, the standard Dark Goblin is seeing more play, which reduces the necessity of using the evolved version. Just like the Bomber and the Drill, the EVO is nowhere near as effective as it once was. 32. Electro Dragon. The evolved Electro Dragon, while occasionally useful in certain matchups against beatdown decks and under the right circumstances, I honestly think is one of the most overrated evolutions in the game, hands down. It typically doesn't generate much value in most matchups, especially versus cycle decks, and it's quite difficult to seamlessly integrate into most decks. You're essentially limited to running it in Golem decks, but even Golem decks have better evolution options. The Lumberloon Freeze deck that featured the E-Drag has practically vanished from the current meta, meaning it doesn't have many favorable matchups, and it's hard to justify in a deck slot. Thus, it's a distinctly below-average evolution. The same applies to the Wizard, which, while it sees a lot of play in mid-ladder, the Evo Wizard is generally not a great choice, except maybe in a Royal Giant deck. That's probably the best fit for the Evo Wizard, or in a Hog deck, though that's considered an off-meta choice. Again, there are typically stronger evolution options available in those decks. 31. Mega Knight. The evolved Mega Knight is up next. Its effectiveness is very matchup dependent. Of course, it is usually better than the standard Mega Knight in most situations. There are actually a few exceptions, though, where the non-evolved Mega Knight might be preferred if you don't want troops to be knocked back. However, against beatdown, the knockback can be quite useful. Overall, the Mega Knight isn't in a fantastic position right now. While it dominates mid-ladder, if your opponent understands how to counter it and play correctly, it's not overly threatening. It's definitely a subpar evolution. 30. Hunter. The evolved Hunter is also a below-average evolution because for the most part its usage is confined to Royal Giant decks, essentially that one deck alone. Even some RG decks prefer other evolutions like the Evo Witch, so it is not a mandatory inclusion in most decks, especially after the removal of its permanent net effect, which used to permastun, making it much stronger previously.
30. Ice Spirit. The evolved Ice Spirit has seen a massive decline. When the Ice Spirit's freeze duration was nerfed, it affected the evolved Ice Spirit much more because it freezes targets twice, as opposed to the standard Ice Spirit, which only does so once. Consequently, nearly everyone is now using the regular Ice Spirit instead of the evolution, and you almost never see this card anymore. Even in cycle decks, such as Royal Hog Cycle or Minor Control, people usually favor the regular Ice Spirit over the evolution. 29. P.E.K.K.A. We conclude this group with the evolved P.E.K.K.A. This evolution has become considerably worse recently because of the Chef nerf. P.E.K.K.A. was frequently seen alongside the Evo Goblin Giant in Chef decks, but the Chef nerf and the weakening of the Evo Goblin Giant also severely reduced P.E.K.K.A.'s power. You're pretty much only seeing it occasionally now in a more traditional P.E.K.K.A. deck, like P.E.K.K.A. Bridge Spam, probably with the Battle Ram, but that combination is not very common. 28. Firecracker. I believe she is decent, but her utility is highly dependent on the matchup. You are pretty much restricted to using her in hog decks because you must be mindful of accidentally triggering the King's Tower. I know she is one of the most hated cards in the game, but truthfully she's not as versatile as one would expect. And of course there are many effective counterplays against her, like arrows and even certain other spells. If you know how to deal with her, she's not that threatening. 27. Bats. The Evo bats have really fallen off. They were once considered one of the top evolutions, but even after the second nerf, the minions and minion horde remain a much better option, leading to a significant drop in Evo bat usage. You only see them from time to time, maybe in a mortar deck. 26. Barbarians. The evolved barbarians are next. They were previously one of the weakest evolutions, but lately they've been seeing increased play, especially in Lava Hound and Bridge Spam decks, where they can be incredibly effective on defense in many situations, particularly if the opponent lacks a card like Fireball. They can gain solid value, but offensively, of course, they don't pose much threat and are easily defended most of the time. 25. Witch. The Evo Witch is a slight prediction as she was one of the cards that received a nerf in the last round of balance changes. She took a major hit to the amount of healing she receives when one of her skeletons is destroyed. Therefore, I'm placing her here as the healing percentage was quite a significant downgrade. I don't believe she'll be considered one of the better evolutions anymore, and her usage will be confined to just a couple of graveyard decks. 24. Lumberjack. The evolved Lumberjack, since being changed to a 2-cycle evolution, is now much more balanced. You primarily see this card now in heavy decks, like Golem, for instance, or perhaps a Bridge Spam deck, but it is never a mandatory inclusion. I feel that some players still prefer the regular Lumberjack over the evolution, choosing to have a couple of other evolutions in their deck instead. 23. Musketeer. The Evo Musketeer is a reasonably balanced evolution. I'd say she is very effective in Loon Cycle, but less impressive in other decks. I mean, you could potentially use her in a giant graveyard deck or an off-meta Elixir Pump deck, but the primary deck where she shines is Loon Cycle. However, her ability can certainly be countered. You can shield the card being targeted for the Evo Musk snipe, maybe deploy skeletons or something similar to block or defend. This counterplay capability is what I think makes her quite balanced. 22. Royal Recruits. The Evo Royal Recruits received a pretty big nerf in the last balance change update, where they need to walk slightly further before they charge. I definitely believe this makes a big difference and alters many interactions, especially given their high number. I no longer consider them an A-tier or even B-tier evolution. My prediction is they will land around here now, becoming much easier to manage and less oppressive as a card in my opinion. 21. Battle Ram. The evolved Battle Ram is another card I'm putting here. It has been performing better recently in decks like P.E.K.K.A. Bridge Spam or maybe a Bridge Spam deck featuring the Evo Lumberjack. For example, it can be quite strong, especially if your opponent doesn't have a building or a stunning card, but it's certainly not as consistently reliable as some other win conditions, so this is a suitable position for it.
20. We'll close out this group with the evolved Goblin Cage. In my view, it's much weaker now after they removed the extra health points from the Brawler. I don't think it's a bad evolution, though, even after that adjustment. I just think it's definitely no longer B tier and certainly not A tier, because I believe it's still highly effective in recruits decks and also in popular meta decks like E-Giant. However, without that additional health, some interactions change, and it was already not great against cycle decks to begin with, so it was very matchup dependent and situational. 19. Mortar. I feel that it is an overall quite balanced evolution, especially since the nerfs it received. It's now mostly just a mortar that shoots a goblin and fires slightly faster. However, if you know how to defend it with specific spells and all the tanking troops in the game, it's definitely not overpowered. It can be good in mortar bait decks and various variations of those, so I just see it as a generally well-balanced evolution. 18. Goblin Barrel. The same applies to the evolved Goblin Barrel. Since they nerfed it so the decoy goblins are not as tough, it has become significantly more balanced. There also has been a noticeable rise in the use of small spells recently, with players using arrows, and the Barbarian Barrel has also grown in popularity, along with Log, of course. So it's definitely kept in check by many small spells and even cards like E-Spirit. Log bait has been less dominant, so I certainly don't think it's A tier, but it is a very good evolution idea in general. 17. Snowball. The Evo Snowball is also going here. I feel it's a pretty balanced evolution, and the Goblin Drill nerf in the last balance update also helps keep the Evo Snowball in check, as the Goblin Drill is often paired with the Evo Snowball. With that win condition slightly weaker, the Evo Snowball won't rank much higher than this. Nevertheless, it's extremely useful for pushing troops behind the tower, which is why it pairs so well with the drill. However, in decks like Loon Cycle, the regular Snowball is actually preferred, so it's definitely not a completely broken evolution to the extent that the regular card sees no play. 16. Archers. The Archers are next. I think they're very effective in decks like Expo, but their utility is not very broad outside of that. I suppose you could also include them in something like P.E.K.K.A. or Giant Graveyard, but they're definitely not one of the most versatile evolutions in the game. And of course, arrows are an efficient way to counter them, so I definitely believe they are quite balanced. They were stronger in some previous metas, but I think many other evolutions surpass them now. 15. Furnace. The evolved Furnace, since its movement speed was increased, I think is a bit worse, but I still believe it's a solid evolution just because of its fundamental design. I also generally believe the fact that it spawns fire spirits will always be a decent evolution unless it receives a huge nerf that completely cripples it. I just think it's so much superior to the traditional or regular Furnace before it was reworked. I still view it as a solid evolution. It's slightly weaker, but still versatile. You can use it in bridge spam, in minor decks, and even in heavier decks like Golem, even after the nerf it received. But it will be toned down somewhat and definitely no longer A or S tier after the movement speed nerf, making it faster. 13. Skeleton Barrel. The Evo Skeleton Barrel is definitely much more balanced since its death damage was nerfed. It's no longer dealing an almost infinite amount of damage on top of your tower or the structure it drops on. However, it's still a very solid evolution, especially when combined with other swarm-type cards or the Miner. But I think they're just better alternatives, like the evolved Wall Breakers, which tend to be a bit more consistent and also cheaper, which is why I don't think the evolved Skeleton Barrels are as dominant anymore, especially since they received that death damage nerf.
12. Tesla. The Evo Tesla is next. I feel it is definitely a really solid building. Ever since they boosted its pulse damage, it's been absolutely outstanding, especially in Expo decks. It's also very good in Goblin Drill decks, and you can use it in Log Bait if you choose to, but the only reason I'm not putting it in the next group is that I still think the Evo Cannon is a superior option even after the nerf the Evo Cannon received. So it's placed here because the Evo Cannon is still stronger. Number 11, Skeleton Army. This is a bit of a prediction because this card is newly released, but in my opinion, the Evolved Skeleton Army belongs here. There are many casual players who claim the Evolved Skeleton Army is absolutely awful and completely useless, but I actually don't think it's as bad as people believe. though I also don't think it's broken. Some new decks have started to emerge recently. People have realized how effective it is in certain minor cycle poison decks and in bait decks, but you can't just slot it into everything. It is a situational evolution. In some matchups, it will certainly not be very valuable, but in others, and in the correct deck, it can be highly effective. I think the biggest challenge for this evolution is the fact that you have to play the regular skeleton army a couple of times, which is a terrible card. If you're not in mid-ladder, you likely know how bad the skeleton army is, so I think that's what keeps the EVO balanced. I think the evolution itself is decent, but having to use the regular S-army twice is often not an easy task. Number 10, Royal Giant. I actually believe it is one of the better evolutions in this meta, especially after the recent nerfs. The Chef Tower Troop nerf and the Vines nerf, along with various other changes, I think really benefited the RG, and I expect to see it much more this season. Also, I think people really underestimate the power of its knockback ability, because if someone is attacking it with a mini PKA, a Knight, or a Goblin Gang, Skeletons, or whatever, that ability, which deals damage and knocks troops back, will be extremely useful in many situations, hopefully allowing you an easier time to get it to the tower. Number 9, Valkyrie. The evolved Valkyrie might surprise you, but even though she lost that extra health she had, I still believe her ability alone is what makes her so good. She remains an incredible defensive unit. So for those of you who use the Evo Valkyrie, she's definitely not dead. You don't need to worry about that. I think she is still a well above average evolution because the extra health was not the primary reason people ran her. I think that bonus health was just what arguably made her overpowered. You could argue they nerfed her in the right way because she's still a strong card, she still fulfills the same role, and she's still capable of defending virtually every push she could before. She simply lacks that bonus health, so she remains a top-tier choice. Number 8, Baby Dragon. The evolved Baby Dragon, I believe, simply moves down from S tier. Even at 2 cycles, I still think it will be extremely, extremely strong. It has already been very successful at the start of the season in various beatdown decks, whether in a Golem deck or E-Giant Graveyard. It will still be excellent in heavier decks. It will probably only be weaker in cycle decks, which is probably a good thing, because previously you could literally just use it in every single deck in the game, which is why it was so overpowered at 1 cycle. But now at 2 cycles, I think it will excel in heavier decks, which is likely where it belonged initially. And its ability to speed up everything will still be incredibly difficult for opponents to manage sometimes. So it is definitely a well above average evolution. Number 7, Knight. The Knight is going here. He is certainly above the Valkyrie, especially after the Valkyrie's health was nerfed. I think the Knight definitely has a slight advantage over her now. The Knight will be very effective, of course, in graveyard decks and control decks in general. He will also be very good in a multitude of cycle decks, whether it's, for instance, a log bait deck or a goblin drill deck or an expo deck. He is definitely going to be very valuable and often just very difficult to eliminate due to that shield ability. Number 6, Inferno Dragon. The evolved Inferno Dragon is definitely a very good evolution. It was not nerfed in the last round of balance changes. It will be very effective in beatdown decks, whether it's Graveyard Freeze or Lava Hound, for example. And it is also very strong against beatdown decks, so it's simply excellent. And if your opponent doesn't have a reset for it, it can be extremely difficult to deal with. Even if you are facing a cycle deck, if they lack a reset, it can certainly reach their tower if they aren't careful. Number 5, Executioner. The evolved Executioner is also definitely a very good evolution. It will be very effective against air decks, good against beatdown generally, and even against cycle decks, it can be useful sometimes against a Hog Rider knocking it back or Royal Hogs. Again, this is another evolution that avoided a nerf, and the fact that it's a 1-cycle evolution also makes it very potent, especially in Hognado, Graveyard Freeze, and even Ram Rider decks. It is just a super, super solid evolution. I would say the main reason it's not number 1 is the requirement to deploy the regular Executioner in order to access the EVO, and also because it's not the most versatile card. You can't just fit it into every single deck in the game, and you can certainly play around it. 4, Cannon. The Evo Cannon I don't believe is S tier anymore. I think it's A tier after the nerf it ended up receiving. I genuinely believe it's A tier now because the Evo Cannon I'm pretty sure no longer destroys wall breakers. That is a really significant change in interaction that I observed. So nerfing its damage, I think, was a really good decision by Supercell, and I think it helps bounce the card. But I still think it's the best building evolution in the game by a large margin. I suppose it was somewhat inevitable that this would still be the case, especially because they also nerfed the Evo Cage, which was already weaker than the cannon. So it still remains the best building in the game, but it just won't be able to defend absolutely everything anymore.
Number 3, wall breakers. The evolved wall breakers, in my opinion, even though they received a minor nerf in the last balance update, they basically nerf the damage they deal to troops. So now you can't just use them defensively to essentially blow everything up and secure huge value. This tones it down a bit, but I still think it's a top 3 Evo in the game. After all, it finished number 1 globally last season, and I don't anticipate that changing much, especially considering it also pairs exceptionally well with other powerful evolutions. For example, many Evo Skeleton Army decks I've seen include the Evo Wall Breakers, and they combine perfectly with the Miner, another card that is just super strong. Recruits and Evo Wall Breakers are very good. Evo Wall Breakers are also going to be very effective with the Mega Knight too. They work well with the Goblin Drill and are good with the Evo Knight. They are simply great with many other evolutions. They're very inexpensive, dealing a lot of damage for only 2 elixir, and I just still see them as a very strong evolution even after the small nerf they were given, especially because many other strong Evos were also nerfed. Number 2, Zap. The evolved Zap is a bit of a prediction, but I actually genuinely think it will be an S-tier evolution this season. The biggest reason for this is because the Vines ended up receiving a nerf. Because the Vines were weakened, I believe the Evo Zap will be highly effective once again. I think the Vines were one of the factors that prevented the Evo Zap from being as good last season. But now that the Vines are less of an issue, the Zap will be very good again in many heavier decks. Whether it's Giant, for example, P.E.K.K.A., or perhaps even a Ram Rider deck, for instance, or a Lava Hound deck, it will be an extremely valuable tool to have in every beatdown deck. We've been in a major beatdown meta recently. Even in some cycle decks, you could still use it if you truly wanted to. I mean, I think it works very well even with the Miner, for example, if you really want to include it in a Miner deck. But I just think in beatdown and control, it fits into so many different types of decks, and it's simply outstanding. Its interactions for resetting troops, whether it's an Inferno Dragon, and also for eliminating cards like the Evo Archers, the Firecracker, for example, and even the Minions, which are currently very strong, make it incredibly valuable. Number 1, Royal Ghost. I think the Evo Royal Ghost is going to be incredibly overpowered. I think it will be better than the evolved Skeleton Army simply because it spawns 2 additional Royal Ghosts. And when you see the interaction, I think you've all seen the clip where it gets on a tower and then 2 extra Royal Ghosts appear. I just think it's going to be absolutely broken. The other reason why, you might argue that you shouldn't factor in the strength of the regular card when ranking the evolution, but I somewhat disagree with that. This is why the Evolved Executioner is the only reason I don't consider it an S tier. And that wraps up our complete ranking of all 38 evolutions. Did your favorite card make it into the top 10, or did it sink down to the bottom? Let me know your thoughts on this list in the comment section below. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the meta.